Excited to welcome Richmond head coach Aaron Roussell to the basketball podcast. Coach Roussell, the reigning A10 Coach of the Year, enters the sixth season as the head coach of the Richmond Spiders women's basketball team. With an impressive career winning percentage of 69%, Roussell has transformed the Spiders into a competitive force in the Atlantic 10 Conference and nationally. Roussell's tenure at Richmond has been marked by significant accomplishments. In the 2023-24 season, he led the Spiders to their first A10 regular season title and championship since 1991, culminating in an historic appearance in the NCAA Women's Basketball Championship. His coaching prowess has also been recognized with individual accolades, including the 400th career win against Loyola Chicago and the program's 1,000th win against Fordham. Prior to his time at Richmond, Roussell gained valuable experience at Minnesota State, University of Chicago, and Bucknell. His consistent success throughout his career has solidified his reputation as a skilled and dedicated coach. Hey, man, awesome to talk to you.
Hey, it's great talking with you as well.
Yes. Long overdue, probably. That's how these all go.
I'm not sure I deserve being in this company. You say overdue, it's premature to me as well.
Oh, there you go. What is 400th win? That's pretty good.
I'll tell you what, I lucked into all of this. Now, I don't know, just brief history. I meant to send this to you, but yeah, it's been 20 years. And when I first got the job at University of Chicago, I was 24, or I guess 25, I think, and youngest coach in NCAA, and 20 years been able to withstand it. But
it's awesome. It's why you still look young.
Yeah, I do. Some days I feel young, some days I don't. But a quick tidbit, I almost was laughing when I thought of this. I was going through in my mind kind of old podcasts from years. Ryan Saunders. So Ryan Saunders, when I was in college, I would come back in the summers and coach boys AAU. And he was on that team. That was how I got into it. That's when I first got into this. And crazy enough, was always working Flip Saunders summer camps. And if you were to pinpoint something of how I got into this, connections from working his camps got me into a high school boys job. Another connection from those camps got me into coaching, got me into the women's game as a GA. So it's wild how all of this is small basketball world, but wild how all of this gets started.
That is an amazing connection. I definitely did not know that. And where was that? Was that the Minnesota area?
Yep, that was up in Minnesota. So Flip was the head coach there at that point, and then remained in contact a little bit with Ryan. He's been fantastic sharing stuff. I gave him a little bit of hard time that you guys were talking about defense, because everything I've ever talked about with him and his dad was always offense. And, but that's weirdly how I got started too. Everything to me was always defense. And for some reason, I think the longer we all get into this, you just start becoming fascinated with offense. And I think that's where a lot of the I shouldn't say the real coaching, but there's an entertainment component to this too, but yeah.
Let me welcome you to the podcast, but we might just keep all that on because that was pretty cool, Coach. Anyways, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, man, this is great to be here. This is an honor. What you've done for the game over the last few years has been incredible. The number of topics or the number of conversations your podcast has started both in our offices with friends, just in my own mind, on runs in the morning has been fantastic for the game.
I'm grateful for people like you that have supported it and obviously been willing to share. And I think we talked about that briefly in some private text getting ready for this. Just first of all, how curious coaches are nowadays. Isn't it an unbelievable time to be a coach?
It truly is. I think when you watch the highest level of basketball, whether that's at the NBA, WNBA, overseas, I think watching FIBA games, we were all treated to that during the Olympics, but watching EuroLeague, but even just clips on Twitter, right? Like we all bash social media. There's so many times I wish I had nothing to do with it, but then I'm like, you know what? But I would lose those clips. I would lose those tidbits and the interesting people that you follow. I think doing this for 20 years, we all sometimes fall into that trap of when you're looking for something, hey, you revert back to, hey, this worked 10 years ago and this did. And you realize that the game has changed so much. I think even those of us that have been in the game for a while, you have to constantly fine tune things. You have to constantly find new things. And there's just so many things out there right now, Chris. It's really an incredible time for basketball, an incredible time to be a coach.
Absolutely. And we referenced your 400th career win. And I'm just curious, through this historic year for you at Richmond, did you feel it coming? Did you feel it building to this point? Because that's always a curious question for coaches.
I'll be honest, there's been years where maybe I felt that. I remember there was a couple of years when we really had this thing going at Chicago. I remember making a comment once that I got done with the first practice of the fall and said, we're going to win a national championship this year. And came close, didn't quite happen. Maybe some years at the end of Bucknell. This year at Richmond, I thought we had some pieces. We had a really tough injury with Anna Camden coming into last summer. And I felt that we could be good, but I just felt like we couldn't probably withstand a whole lot of injuries after that. Fortunately for us, was able to stay healthy. I think the pieces clicked. You always in your mind think of how you can play and how this can be hard to guard. But we just had some young kids that step up, and some of our older kids just took on a persona for that team. They really got along really well. You've probably had teams like this. I think every great coach, every great season with a coach has pinpointed to, it's just the chemistry, man. There was something about it. And no question, this past year's team had that, and even more so at the end of the season. God, we were just playing really incredible basketball the last few weeks of the season.
Absolutely. You guys were a joy to watch. And I think I referenced a few of your stuff on social media, and they got great response as well. And that brings us to a little bit of the topic we'll talk about, which is the Princeton offense. And you referenced it in our talk as well, like just the fascination with high school coaches, especially about the Princeton offense.
Yeah, and it's funny working here at Richmond with Chris Mooney, who played at Princeton and is unbelievable at all the things that they do. I think he gets upset when it's called Princeton offense, because I think so much of this is against, not even against, but changed and evolved to what people think about the Princeton offense. I think when we were playing, when I was growing up, you heard Princeton offense, it was almost like an eye roll. I was like, oh, do we have to play slow? Can't we play a little bit faster? And Chris Mooney is an unbelievable job, really just trying to play faster. And again, I think he takes a lot of pride in Princeton, but just playing a lot faster. And I think you watch a lot of things right now. We referenced earlier just how many learning tools there are out there. I just think it's the best and easiest way to teach the game. I'm probably more obsessed with that than anything, whether that's youth sports or at our level, how we teach it, just the spacing and everything else. And I think you reference this, right? There's so many tools out there, but even just watching high school coaches just so passionate about what they're doing. I think we at this level, I always say whether it's baseline out of bounds or tweaks to an offense, I think even the youth coaches, high school coaches, I was a high school coach at one point too, just are really finding new things and running this stuff incredibly well.
I posted it to Twitter to our audience to get a whole bunch of questions because I knew you were coming on. And not surprisingly, it was the most responses I got probably on a question prior to a podcast. And just so many coaches. Yeah, so many coaches had such curious questions. But let me start with this. First of all, one of my theories behind, again, we'll call it Princeton for lack of anything else. It's a hybrid. We know that it's being adapted and adopted in so many different ways in terms of pace and all these other things too. But one of the things that I think supports coaches so much is that there's a structure to it that becomes this initial kind of base level of understanding of spacing that helps them then evolve it for their individual players and then for their team concepts as well. Is that something that connects for you as well? Is that this initial structure helps you teach more?
Yeah. And maybe just a pause for a quick kind of how we arrived at this. We were running a little bit more of a 4-out. I think everybody saw that as motion type stuff. We really liked what we were doing. Going back to Chicago and Bucknell and here, everybody kind of calls this backpick motion. South Dakota State women were doing a really good job of that and adopted a lot of stuff from them. We got to the end of that, I call it the COVID season, 2021, realized we just had a different roster. We're in the tournament that year, A10 tournament, and just kept running different things to get our point guard off ball screens, and realized we just didn't have enough stuff in there, and really used a lot of COVID to just take a look at what we were doing. Like we mentioned, so many resources out there, just tried to learn the 5-out stuff and had some great mentors and just people that run the game at really high levels. And so in my mind, just wanted to play 5-out. And 5-out was the best way to do all of these things. And I was so adamant against playing in the high post. That lasted probably a season, and you realize that 5-out sounds great, but it really isn't awesome spacing when you think about it, right? You got to put somebody in the dunker, you got to put somebody in the low post, you got to put somebody in the high post. So I really liked the openness of the basket, but we weren't as great as what we are right now as cutting it, as some of the off the ball actions that we were doing to open up the spacing on the perimeter. And so begrudgingly, for whatever reason, just was, no, I didn't want to do Princeton, I didn't want to do high post. But once we understood, hey, when somebody's in the high post, this is the framework, right? This is the shell of what it's supposed to look like. Going back to long-winded, your original question, our kids know when we're in the high post, this is where the rest of us four have to be. And I think that gives less intimidation for, I think at that point, I've been coaching for 16, 17 years. And even to me, was maybe a little bit intimidated at what I thought the Princeton offense was. I think when you understand the structure and understand the different things that you can do, and then a lot of things, man, it just grows different things, and like different things have success for you. That's how it's morphed for us.
So, Aaron, what portion do you teach first then?
Yeah, for us, it all started with transition. So we start there. We start maybe the framework of what it looks like quickly in the half court. But I really try to make sure that this is not a half court offense, right? This offense, the spacing starts as soon as we get the rebound. And so we'll do a lot of stuff with the teaching of, and maybe this doesn't completely answer your question, do a lot of stuff with the teaching of 4-on-3. One, because I think you can have a lot of success when you have a player advantage, right? And so all of a sudden, that one more pass, the cutting to the basket, telling kids, hey, you got to cut when you're unguarded, works really well when one person's always going to be unguarded. And so we maybe teach some of the 5-out part of it just so they understand the spots of maybe where we're trying to run to. But really, this started as we were only doing 5-out in transition. We were still going to do our 4-out back pick motion. And then we just started liking it, started getting really good, probably had the right personnel for it. And so I think the answer is we start with just a quick framework of what the shell looks like in the half court, and then everything else is fast. And like I said, we do a lot of stuff, especially early in the season, maybe tricking them into having success when you have a player advantage. So a lot of 4-on-3, 5-on-4 there.
Traditionally, a lot of going back to the Pete Carroll teaching, a lot of 5-on-0 to be able to get the structure of it as well. So do you do a lot of that as well, or how? Because you referenced 4-on-3, which I think 5-on-4, 4-on-3 are one of the best ways to be able to skip some of the 5-on-0 reps.
I feel like if I answer this, there's a portion of the basketball community that is going to tell me how wrong I'm doing my job if we do 5-on-0. And so at the risk of upsetting people, I felt like I was, hey, no, we're not doing any 5-on-0. That's wasted time. To be honest with you, we don't do it a lot, but I think it's an important teaching tool, right? Hey, these are the actions. This is how we start. This is what it can look like. Okay, and it's really hard to make mistakes, right, when you're 5-on-0 because there's no bad reads or anything. I think the great thing about this offense, even 5-on-5, there's not a lot of mistakes you can make because you can play off of everything. But we do, Chris. 5-on-0, I think, is an important tool for us. I try to limit it, try to make sure if we're doing it at a fast pace. We've probably done, and maybe this is to appease both sides of this conflict here, but we do a lot of 4-on-0 where everybody's going to get a shot, right? So 4-on-0, we'll call it 4-on-0 shooting. So 4-on-0, we're running an action. Once we get the shot from that action, we've got assistant coaches here. So now we're all getting a shot. And I don't know, maybe I'm trying to appease both worlds right now, but
you don't have to appease both worlds.
5-on-0 is something as a teaching tool. Sorry, everybody, 5-on-0 is an important teaching tool at our level. Maybe that's just me.
No apology necessary. I'm actually, again, like people, like certainly I presented the other side of it because I think it's too extreme the one way, but I'm all for 5-on-0 because again, there's a certain freedom once a player memorizes the structure. That freedom leads to more confidence in terms of making decisions. And that structure really does free them from decision making at the initial part of learning. So I think there's some value to it in that way. And I don't know if there's any other thoughts on that, but
yeah, and we probably don't do a lot of set actions. It's probably something we can talk about later, but we have our actions and then maybe our quote plays are just stacking those actions on top of each other, right? There's not a lot of me doing this or play calls. Play calls for us are usually actions, and then we'll stack those actions on, especially once you get longer or further into the season. I think with a little bit older crew right now that's experienced in our system, I can tell them to play 5-0 and just play. And I think 5 years ago, that would seem so random and so wrong to do. But hey, man, we're going to start with dribble handoff ball screen. And then we can still do 12 seconds of offense. And our kids just find different actions, whether it's a flare on the backside, a cut, whatever. And you can say there's no reads there at that point, but I think just the pace of it, understanding that there are different things that we can do on top of that, I do think is helpful for everybody, whether they're a freshman or whether they're a fifth year.
I'm curious your perspective. I had a chance to talk to Tex Winter a long time ago about the triangle and ran the triangle, and very similar to a certain extent to the Princeton in the sense that there's a structure to it. But he said basically at that point, you don't know what's going to happen because players are going to make decisions, and that decision is going to determine what the other players do. And that's my perspective on Princeton a little bit.
Yeah, and that to me, and appreciate who doesn't love everything that Tex Winter did. My first year at University of Chicago, for me, it being 25, just getting the job 2 weeks before the season started, I had to come up with something. To me, Princeton at 25 was the easiest to teach, to structure at that Division III level. You didn't have a lot of practice time. I'm sure our players would joke with me, but thank God we still had the internet in 2004 when I first got that job of just trying to find new things, a lot of championship production, videotapes, and all of those things, trying to learn something quick. settled on the Princeton because, again, I think you could have structure, but then as you got going, you taught that structure and you could just play from there. And I think that's what a lot of the quote Princeton and high post and 5-out is of, yo, man, this is the framework, right? This is the spots. We can be interchangeable, but these are the spots you want to be. This is a great action. These are 8 actions that we know we can do from this base home set. And then we're just going to like from there. But you have to know what those options are, right? Like I go to my son's an 8th grader now. And so you watch a lot of youth basketball and you watch every coach out there is saying motion. Sometimes you give somebody so many options, they don't know what to do, right?
Exactly.
They don't know what those actions are. And so I think that's what we talked about earlier with the 5-out of teach some actions, dribble handoff ball screen, dribble handoff stagger away. Hey, after the stagger, let's do something else. Find that next action. That all sounds great. Here we are and just turned September. Our freshmen right now are like, go find what action, coach? What can I do? And thankfully, we've got great older kids that are telling them, but also they're learning from 5-on-0 when other people are doing it as well, which we didn't even touch on, but I think that is an important part of it, of other people that are sitting out can learn from that 5-on-0 as well.
I love it. And how do you reference pace? You reference transition. So talk to us about pace. Are there some pace goals with how you guys play?
This might be an analytics thing for me, but we talk about playing fast. Early when we first put this in, I loved it. We probably had one of the fastest point guards in the country. She's off playing her grad year at North Carolina right now. Even for the ACC, she will be considered fast. So we really did try to play fast, and it bothered me because you started to look, and I knew that we were doing. I knew all of these numbers were showing that we were, and then you look at the pace number, and we weren't up there like I wanted to be. I think we're maybe a little bit different. Again, probably going to get emails or something from people that say I'm doing it wrong. I don't know if we've married our offense and our defense the same way.
Do you actually get emails like that, Coach?
Maybe not emails, but I'll get comments and like coaches, right? You just know people.
You've won 400 games. I think you're okay.
Yeah,
I get it. I get it.
But I think a lot of that is maybe our offense and our defense aren't married the same way a lot of people talk about. I think we're a little bit more traditional pack line. We're not out there getting a lot of steals. So there's not as many, our offensive possessions might be a little bit quicker. Our defensive possessions might be a little bit slower. So I think that's a weird thing, but we are charting how many times are we getting into an action before 26, 27 on the shot clock. Not trying to rush shots, but how many times there's 22 to 24 are we getting a shot off? And so we sometimes, especially right now, I mentioned we have 2 new point guards that I think are going to be really good, but boom, man, we got to get going. This is not, and I think that's why, going back to it, you don't want to teach too much in that half court, because otherwise they dribble down and think they got to get to one of those 5-out spots. That ain't what we're trying to do, man. We're trying to pepper the paint. We're trying to get into an action as quick as possible. Your decision, and it shouldn't be me calling it, but you need to trigger an action in those first 3 or 4 seconds for this to work at the optimal level. So we do chart all of that stuff. There's some great tools out there that we can use, but we've got a great video guy and stats guy that really, how quickly do we get into our offense? What are our numbers at 20 seconds, the first 10 seconds of the shot clock? What are our shooting percentage? What's our shot quality there? And then run it on down from that.
I'm like you. I get those emails too, Coach, or these DMs, and I'm like, I don't know all the Princeton names, so I apologize in advance for all that too. But I just called it whatever I called it. But I know splits are a big part of it, and that's the one part that I think I've adapted the most. Running gets into overcuts, into splits, and just different actions out of that. So, can you go a little bit in depth for us on the decisions or the way that you teach the decisions, particularly out of splits?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to the old school. I don't know if you can see, there's a Bobby Knight old school picture in there. The old school motion that some of us were taught growing up, right? If you get to the screen and you're going backdoor, you're curling it, you're a straight cut, maybe you're bumping back. A lot of that still is the same for us. We had a lot of really good shooters last year. I actually weirdly think we might even be better this season. So a lot of times that defensive gravity can get out to the arc, or you see a lot of switches. So sometimes it also turns into, you can both pop. You can both end up at the arc, but man, we really love when somebody goes to the basket early. So those splits, let's get somebody going to the basket. Let's get somebody away from the basket. And when people start to switch, or hey, you take the low, we have different counters that we can do, especially with our older kids. I'll be honest, sometimes they just make it up, man. That's the beauty of this offense too. When you promote creativity, there was countless times last year that I was like, what'd you see right there? Why'd you do that? And sometimes you come back and make that an action. And sometimes you're just like, keep doing that, man, because that really did work. But going back to it, we really do love it when we can get somebody going to the basket. Sometimes that cut may end up with a post up. Sometimes it may end up with a clear, but I think if you can get somebody into one of those long closeouts, and a lot of people talk it out there of great advantages, big advantages, those long closeouts, I think is a great thing for us. Or quite honestly, I mentioned the post up. That cut to the basket, especially off a switch, I think is really good when you have a long, lanky team like we do. We do post our guards quite a bit. And honestly, with all due respect to our guards, our posts shoot the heck out of it. And so I think we're able to do some things differently with some of those splits of who's cutting to the basket and not saying, hey, she's the better shooter, so we want her popping. You're the better cutter, so we want you going. It's a little bit more based on the read of what the defense gives us there.
Is there a decision tree or progression for players? If I'm going to set the screen, do I jump stop before the other player makes a decision? You know what I'm saying in terms of that?
Yeah.
Or does it become like at the beginning is that and then it doesn't? Or where do you go with that?
I'm not good at these, man, because even going back to do you like 5-on-0? Can it just be both, right? Can sometimes
It can be. Yeah.
Everything in life is like either or. We're in election year right now, and I don't know, man. Sometimes there's good to both of these things right here. I would say I think we still want to make sure that we have a screener, right? You still want to know who the screener is. If you really start getting into our offense, sometimes again, because we do set a lot of flare screens, there's so many times where that down screener is the screener in a lot of these splits. We'll do some things where, hey, we'll make it look like you're the screener, but really you're coming off of the screen here at this spot. But we do like that screener to, quote, arrive first. We say that a lot, but not by much, man. Coach Mooney will tell you, I think a lot of times with that, especially that away, that initial first split, is we want that kid running through a lot. We're maybe less rules oriented with that. But like I said, I think if one of them can go to the basket, I think that's usually better. Not the end of the world if they both end up at the arc. So as far as decision tree, I know there's some really good coaches out there of, hey, when they do, this is what we do. I don't know that we're or at least I'm as organized with that decision tree, but I think the gray that they see with that, they know what's really good. They know when to make that cut, especially early in the possession. Making that cut off the down screen is probably a great thing to do, refusing that.
Yeah, I imagine that when you can't actually tell there is a decision tree, that's probably when it's more powerful, right?
Yeah, I think we found last year with a little bit of an experienced team, and I say experienced, we had 2 sophomores last year that just gym rats, understand the game. Juniors now, they've been in our system. They've played a lot of minutes. Sometimes it's just that level of experience. We say experience because how long have they been in your offense? That's, I think, one thing going back to why the 5 out is some of the tweaks and just deep things that we had to do in I call it our old offense, took a little bit longer for kids to kind of master and get comfortable with. We haven't had a lot of roster turnover this day and age, especially compared to everybody else. But I think that was something I saw early of let's not make these things so complicated, right? Let's make sure we have a couple, I think, really impactful and great transfers right now. I want them to be able to play right away. I want them to understand things right away and be comfortable early. And so I think by doing that, it allows them to maybe jump in and make an impact a little bit earlier with that.
Really high level coach. I'm not sure you wanted me to say his name, but he contacted me with a question, which I thought was great. What is harder to play against, the teams that take away the 3 and live with some back cuts, or the teams that pack it and give up some challenge 3s?
Here we are as a team that probably give up more challenge 3s than most. I think it goes back to the answer is sometimes depends. But Duke did a really good job giving away a scout report. They're really athletic, switching everything, taking away that arc. Our point guard had a great day. Some of the teams in our league last year that really tried to take away the arc and switch things and protect that. We have some post-up kids. We have some kids that can get to the basket. Our point guards had unbelievable days on some of those. I do think it's harder for us when maybe you're out there a little bit taking that thing away. That being said, I know you look at our numbers and you look at how we shoot it and everything and think, oh, you can't give this team 3s, but that's not how we think, man. Really, everything is we're trying to pepper the basket. I want paint touches. I want 2s. I was just meeting with our stats guy, and it was frustrating. It was like for the second out of 3 years, I think we either led the country or were closely top of the country in 2-point field goal percentage. And we were near the bottom of the country in number of 2-pointers attempted. I think if you look at a lot of high-powered offenses, you'd see a similar relationship, which is, I know, not the most logical thing. But I think for us, you start taking what we're comfortable with at the basket or away from the basket, taking those things away. I do think it's probably harder for us if at the risk of giving away scouting reports right now.
Yeah, you don't have to give away scout. We're all good with
Hey,
that.
man, you want to let our kids this year shoot it. I'm also perfectly fine with that too. High level of confidence with that.
Well, the reality is you have a solution to everything, right, Coach?
Again, maybe
In
that's giving
theory.
us too much credit. I think usually by the end of the season, if you've done this well and scheduled right, you're going to see you're going to have to tweak everything, right? You're going to have to counter this when other people are countering, and hopefully once you've seen all the different defenses, our scout guys do a really good job of just making things random at times. In theory, you should have an answer to all of this, and this goes back to probably straying a little bit, but my early years was just defense. And then you start to realize, and a lot of great coaches out there. I remember all the old, I forget the whatever it was. It'll come back to me. But a lot of the old videos were just like that back and forth. I remember Stan Van Gundy and Flip Saunders going back and forth of like, all right, when you counter this, I'm going to do that. And you start to realize that there is an offensive answer for everything, especially this day and age. I know everybody says defense wins championships. Look at the numbers, maybe that's not quite the case. And again, probably getting you to which is more important, defense, offense argument here that we're pushing. But I just think there's an offensive answer for everything, especially when you have this day and age, as skilled as everybody is, when you have kids that can shoot the basketball and pass, we should win. We should get a quality shot dang near every possession. I still contend that.
I know pressing coaches talk a lot about the teams in our league don't press so that they suddenly have to play us and get ready for press. It becomes an extra challenge, right? And that's what I always felt for playing against Princeton teams when I coached college. And that was the same thing. It was just such a different prep in that way. And we always tried to simplify the defense rather than complicate it. But I am curious, are you playing, because within your conference, some teams get more used to different things. Are they getting very scout specific on certain actions and certain players within it? Because I always found that really hard.
Yeah, you maybe start to see it now. Again, our league has changed. And so
Right.
part of us making the change to quote Princeton in our 5-out was to counter what everybody else was doing in the league. I've always said that as a mid-major, man. If you're trying to beat the Power Fives, Power Fours, whatever we're calling them now, you immediately automatically start off at a disadvantage, right? In theory, they're getting better recruits. They're getting better at all of that. I think we've done a good job finding some kids that maybe could play at a higher level, but they're choosing you. And in theory, you're a step behind. So what can you do that counters that? I think if you talk to a lot of Power Four coaches, they'll tell you some of their scariest games are in the non-conference season because at our level, the 6'4", 6'5" kids that can be really good in the SEC and the ACC, when you get down the list of those 6'4", 6'5" kids, they're not always kids that can defend those kids anyway, right? And so for us being the mid-major, it was all about player development. But how can we counter those teams? All right, we said we want to win a game in the NCAA tournament. I just don't know that we're going to play the same game, the same style against those teams and be able to have a win. I think God bless our players, man. We played really well in the NCAA tournament against Duke. Duke might have been the most athletic team in the country last year. It was a very scary matchup. We were able to spread them out a little bit, and a lot of things worked in the first maybe 20, 25 minutes of the game. And then they did a really good job of using their advantage against us with their rebounding and everything there. So going back to it, I weirdly have seen, and maybe I think this isn't just our conference. I don't think we started a trend, but I think you start to see more and more people playing that Princeton, the 5-out. And so it's almost as a coach, you're wondering what's that next thing going to be, right? Are we going to go back to more motion? Are we going to go back to more two bigs? A lot of these things are cyclical, but going back to it, I thought we definitely had that advantage early when teams, and at least in our league, were getting a little bit bigger, getting a little bit more pounding things at the basket. There was a lot of low scoring games. And I joked, I was like, somebody in this league's got to start scoring points. Why not us, right? Let's play a little bit faster. Let's play more free and maybe shoot the three a little bit more. That helped with the kids that we had. But again, I think we started recruiting a little bit more to that for that reason, like you said, just to be different than everybody else.
Love it. And I love that was one of those must-watch games for me in the NCAA tournament, was watching you guys against Duke. Just really entertaining game and great styles by both teams and that part of it. So talk to us, Coach, interested about your rules or principles you have for cutting, because I think that's a fascination nowadays. And it doesn't even have to be Princeton related, but just so many teams are really trying to explore cutting off the ball, especially on drives and different types of possibilities like that.
It's the first thing we teach, and honestly, it was the first thing we taught even before this kind of model that we're doing right now. I think every offense, no matter what you're running, the principle of it, the first foundation, that first brick is just the cutting, right? I think it's essential in our offense just because of the spacing we talked about, right? 5-out sounds great. And I think when you start talking to youth coaches, oh yeah, you're spreading everybody out and all of it. 5-out is not the best spacing offense unless you have some off the ball movement, you have cutting. And so I don't want to pause you, but I just want to say, you've said it twice.
And I can't encourage coaches more. 5-out sounds wonderful, but the single gaps all over the floor are a
Doesn't work.
huge problem. And
Doesn't
please,
work.
if you ever coach against me, run 5-out and don't run any movement.
Absolutely. And I think when you're watching youth basketball,
It's
that's,
all
hey,
there.
we think we're doing all of this. And it's really tough. Even if you have a great kid to get into the basket, why not give her the double gap, right? Why not give her more space? It's just really hard. But again, for us, we'll do a lot of stuff like we said earlier, they're 4-on-3, or it's, hey, 4-on-4 basket cuts. We didn't even talk about this, but I think a lot of these things help your defense as well. We didn't do a lot of stuff defensively in the summer until you look back and you're like, yeah, we did, because our offense is ball screens, dribble handoffs, cutting, all of those sort of things. I said this last week. I don't know if this is the perfect analogy. I probably haven't vetted this, but I stopped halfway into practice and asked our kids, did you guys like capture the flag as a kid? Did we? And about half of them, maybe that's just a social change from when we grew up. But I said, imagine that bottom of the basket, there's a flag there. When somebody else and you're occupying that help defender and they're looking somewhere else, you're running interference there. Go capture the flag. Right? When somebody's not looking and you're able to get uninhibited to the front of the rim, take that cut. So when somebody's putting the ball on the floor and they're drawing two, and this is something we just have to coach better, because we have so many great shooters that immediately in their mind, it's put the ball on the floor. Everybody thinks they're open. Everybody thinks they're open. We can talk about what that does to our offensive rebounding, but just it goes back to everything we're trying to get. We want things at the basket. The threes, everything else will come from that. But if we can occupy defenders, if we can get somebody cutting to the basket, I think that's huge. I think like I mentioned, we had a great point guard last year that was great at drawing two. And so you start looking at some other kids and you're like, I remember it was in a staff meeting and it was like, they're just not great at drawing two, or they're not creating offense for anybody else. I'll tell you what, if you're a great cutter, you are creating offense for somebody else, because you normally are drawn to. You're drawing a different defender. And I think that's gotten lost in basketball, of what IQ, what some of these other things can do, what the cut can do to get somebody else a shot. I think we all as coaches think about a breakdown offensive player that can get somebody else a great shot. I'll tell you what, a great cutter, a great offense can get somebody a great shot. And so that capture the flag is something that we've talked about here in the last week. It still makes sense to me. I don't know if that's exactly the right way to think about it, but I just, when somebody's not looking at your cut, baseline drive, we love that 45 cut. Hey, we don't have a lot of non-shooters, but hey, maybe when you're a non-shooter, maybe you should be the one to cut and somebody else pop back. But if you're not cutting, the whole point of Princeton, the whole point of 5-out is to keep the basket open. It's not because we're just trying to shoot threes. Nothing's changed, man. If we do this really well, our points in the paint are going to be higher than a dominant post offense. We are going to get things at the basket. And that's not even counting the number of times we get to the basket or get to the free throw line from those cuts, from those drives. I just think it's essential if you want to do this really well. And there's some great coaches out there. You've had a lot of them on here of just the cut, but I think that is the single most important thing we've really started to value at a higher level now.
Just to connect it for coaches, when somebody drives and draws two, it's the exact same defensive reaction when they cut and draw two. Like, you're covering it essentially the same way. So those two things connect so well.
When there's 4 eyes and usually early in the season, maybe 8 eyes that are going to the ball, like you got to make that cut. And then there's a scramble from there. I think so much of what we're doing right now is trying to get people into rotations, trying to get people into long closeouts. Defensively, we're trying to prevent that. You got to take advantage when the defense makes a mistake, right? And it's just so hard against great offenses these days to not make a mistake defensively. The mistake you then make offensively is not taking advantage of that mistake on the defensive side.
Are you building that out of 4-on-3 like you referenced a little bit in terms of the cutting, or how are you building that?
I would say probably the best way to do it is that we do a lot of 4-on-4 early. It's just 4-on-4 basket cuts. Hey, there's no ball screens, there's no screens, there's no posting. You're still trying to score. We're full speed. And again, I think this does teach some defensive principles as well. And then again, we'll do some 4-on-3. We'll do some 5. And we do a lot of 4-on-3 transition, right? We'll start you at half court, 8 seconds on the clock. Boom, play from there. Again, it teaches some defensive transition, but just you want to get kids to start learning the extra pass, play offense with a player advantage. You want to get kids to really take advantage of a cut. 11-man. Hey, somebody should be cutting to the basket, man. I get it, the 3's more than 2, but we got to get some sure things at the basket. And another thing we'll do with that is, hey, for these drills or for today, anything in the paint's worth 3, everything outside of the arc is worth 2, just to invert that a little bit and prioritize getting things at the basket.
What's your feelings on automatics or triggers? Because that's a traditional part of the OG Princeton, that a certain thing triggers a certain thing.
Yeah, I think some of our automatics, maybe if going into a drill or handoff and you make a backdoor, you can't fake the backdoor, right? There's a little bit of a touch of you want to get into a get, you want to get into a handoff. Hey, maybe sometimes you're faking the backdoor. We try to go against that. I think anytime there's that slot drive, that baseline drive, we do love that 45 cut. It's not a rule. And so I think when you say rules, I start to get uneasy because I don't like those absolutes. I say, hey, this is probably what you should do. If you're not going to do that, just tell me the reason. Have a great reason to do it. And so I think that gets into our creativity and getting into our decision-making process for our kids of, I just want to know why you did it. And sometimes that is the right decision. The absolutes sometimes just take away that creativity. So to maybe answer your question a little bit more succinctly, we have things that this is going back to your tree of decision-making there. This is probably the best thing, but I can live with you doing something different. Just tell me the why and understand the why.
Love it. I guess options off the drive. So are you teaching a penetration reaction system separate, or is it just all combined within it in terms of certain types of reactions and preferences for players?
The blanket answer is I think a lot of our kids have just understood the feel, right? We do so many things with decision making, so many things with the feel that I think early in my career, it was very much, I think so many kids want to understand the why. They want the black and white. Had a great connection to some high level coaches, and one of them was always like, "It's basketball is played in the gray. Basketball is played in the gray." Hey, sometimes that slot drive turns into 45 cut. You can figure out there's a hammer screen on that weak side. Awesome, man, go for it. I think our kids, because we shoot the ball so well, set a lot of flare screens. I drive, and then when that kid's, we talked about this earlier, their eyes are going to the ball, and then all of a sudden you're going to get clipped on a flare screen, and now it turns into a switch and stuff. I just think that's a really great action that I probably hadn't thought about, and it probably wouldn't have put it on that rules tree, but our kids just got really good at it. And so all of a sudden now it's, yeah, man, that's great. All of a sudden we talk about basket cut when your kid's not looking, but just don't be in the same spot. When your kid's not looking and then they're able to look back at you and find you, that's the mistake. But if they're not looking and all of a sudden you see that and you go get a screen, I think that's a fantastic option for us. And so I don't know if it's if this, then, if that, then. I don't know if it's quite like that. They just know our options there and play from that.
It sounds like your players have a good understanding of who they are and who their teammates are as well. Is that something that's conscious to develop?
Man, I think that's the number one thing that I'm passionate about is just how you teach the game. And it's not, like I said, it's not so much brick. It is brick, but not so much, hey, we learn this and then we learn that. And when this, you have to do that. I don't like that have to word very often. You mentioned absolutes. We have some slight absolutes, but just teaching the game of basketball. And I think that's what I know the small-sided games thing has become popular, and it sounds cool, but it's just become popular. I think playing 3-on-3, obviously watching 3-on-3 at the Olympics was unbelievable. Side note, I wish so much of our summer evaluation wasn't just watching 5-on-5. There was a program 4 or 5 years ago that part of their AAU tournament was a 3-on-3 session. Man, I love that. I think that's a great way to evaluate. I think it's a great way to teach. I think so many times we think that you can't play basketball if you have 5-on-5, unless you have 5-on-5. I'd rather our kids play in pickup. I'd almost rather them play 3-on-3, 4-on-5. Yeah, you got to get some 5-on-5, but just go play 3-on-3. Start with this concept. It's dribble this, and then you got to do that. Hey, start with the post feed, and then you got to do, hey, we're hitting the high post, and then play. So in order to teach this, I think a lot of this is broken down just with that 3-on-3, with that 4-on-3 that we talked about earlier, but just teaching the game, teaching why cutting is important. Some of that's film, but teaching why cutting is important, teaching what that midline means and what it opens up for people, teaching what a screen away from the ball can do for you. And that just builds. And I think if you're starting right now, all of a sudden, I think those things are important, but man, we've just built off of that. And so now we have a fifth-year senior who I've never coached a kid for 5 years before. This is a new experience for me. I'm so thankful she did come back. But Addie Budnick's just, sometimes she's making up stuff out there, and I'm learning from her just because I think she's had that freedom. We've allowed that creativity to just play from there.
You've referenced creativity a lot. So I'm curious how you support that, because one of the biggest things about creativity is obviously permission and freedom. Those two things that come together to be able to give them that possibility to be able to be creative. So what does that mean in your program, and how do you support it?
I think one thing for us as coaches is we had to let loose and probably still have to remind ourselves, remind our staff of we don't need to nitpick at every decision they've made, especially in the summer, especially right now. I know there's a time for roles. I know there's a time for all of this stuff, but not putting the clamps on them. early, like not tying hand behind their back. Just let them play. Like some of the non-shooters, you're living with some of the shots they're taking right now. Just it's fine. Some of those point guard decisions coming off a ball screen. Hey, yeah, I'm not telling you. Tell me why you did that. And every once in a while, I'll test them. Be like, why the heck would you? That makes no sense. What? And say, hey, no, you got to be assertive. Don't let my reaction freak you out right there. Usually, the time I'm getting on them is because I actually like what they did. I just want to see if they're strong enough in their decision making to stand by the decision that they made. And so I think just not nitpicking at things. I think the time for that can be maybe more in film after the fact of, hey, nothing wrong. We did because you did this, somebody else played off it and it was fine. But do you see how when you came off of this thing, what it did on the backside? Do you understand that like once this player comes over, that shake, that rise on that back end is going to be wide open? Let's look for that. And I'm not saying you have to do that every time either, but that's something I want you thinking. That's maybe the top priority. If not that, then you can do something else. So maybe that's more of what you were talking about with that decision-making tree of know what maybe would be the best, but I also want you to play. There's not a whole lot of, I'll get on you if you're not playing hard. I'll get on you if you're spacing out, but I don't want to nitpick at every single decision you make. There's too many decisions out there. And I just hate after the fact saying, you should have done this. I know, man, but the shot didn't go in. I hated that as a player. I even hate that as a coach right now, hearing that of next time, the next time there might be a different situation, man. You can't recreate all of this. Let them play a little more free. And I think it works out for you in the end.
I love that answer because, again, I feel that as soon as we give them very explicit instruction, they're going to follow that. And that's not going to always be the best solution for them.
And sometimes that comes across as hypocritical on our side. Last time, coach, you told me this. And okay, in my mind, there was a few other things going on right there. And so all of a sudden, I think this day and age, so many of these kids want to know the why. I said that I did not go to University of Chicago. I know it's a very high academic school, but back then everybody needed to know the why. I think that's happened. That's grown to everybody right now, right? Everybody, all these kids, they want to know the why, right? Like they want to know, they want to know that black and white. And sometimes, yes, you have to share the why, but other times you just got to let them play. And so now you tell them the why and you tell them what they have to do. They want to follow. They want to have success. These are high achievers that we have here and really everywhere playing the game. You tell them what's the absolute, and they're going to think they have to do that every single time. And just every situation is different. I just think that's part of the build that I've been passionate about, of how you teach the game.
That's a tremendous way to teach the game, is to let them explore before you narrow it down for them in terms of what's possible for them. So I love that. Just take us in a little bit. You mentioned this two-way benefit of running this type of offense and these type of sequences for your defense. So take us in a little bit deeper in terms of connecting offense and defense for you and how you develop it within your practices.
I think every coach back then was always, when we first started, was, all right, what's the percentage of time you spend on your defense? And if you didn't say 60%, 75%, you were doing it wrong, right? You just couldn't win. You didn't understand and it's like, my God, man, that's, again, one of the positives of changing what our offense is. 3 years ago, we were hardly running a ball screen. And so when we weren't great defending the ball screen, you could point to it and be like, no, I didn't do a very good job of putting us in those situations. I didn't drill this enough. We didn't do this. You're not going to get good at something unless you emphasize it. Don't get me wrong. We do breakdown drills with ball screens, boxing out, all of those sort of things. But I think that's just something that maybe as I've gotten older, 3-on-3, 4-on-4, 5, especially the way that we play, man, if we suck at defending ball screens, then we probably messed up a lot of opportunities that we had in practice. Or sometimes in coaches' meetings, we haven't really worked on our ball screen defense in a while. And, okay, that's fine. We do need to drill that, but good God, man, we just set 300 ball screens in these last 2 days of practice. Like, that's a lot of reps that we should be getting. And I think, yes, you have to break those things down, but I think if you're not working on your offense when you're working on your defense, you're not working on your defense while you're working on your offense, especially early in the season before you start getting into specifics, before you start getting into scouts, you're just playing. You're playing, and you should be able to work on those things, whether it's afterwards in film or as you're working on it live as well.
I told this story a long time ago, probably on the podcast, but going to Italy taught me about just valuing offense so much. Like, saw a coach practice. He explained to me, he goes, yeah, we spend 100% of practice on offense. And I was like, coming from North America, that's absurd. And he said, you spend 70% on defense, we'll spend 100% offense. Let's see who wins. And his point was, by developing offense, you're going to develop defense without even working on defense in a sense. And also going all in on something, which is a big part of this whole philosophy. Whatever you're going to do, you got to go all in.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And again, game started here. You can say whenever it happened of teachers going overseas, but man, at the risk of offending everybody over here on the States, man, Europe's doing this pretty well right now. The player development piece they're doing is really great. We went to Spain this past summer. I've got things marked from the summer from our games of some of this is just different actions that we saw in Spain of the other youth team or the other club teams over there running stuff. And that's what I'm saying, man. Like you Twitter right now, you see all these different newsletters, all these different podcasts. People overseas are teaching this game incredibly well. And I think if you were to go back 10 years ago and see what they were doing, a lot of what they were doing then, guess what, is what we're doing right now. It goes to the NBA and then it comes on down. And so kudos to those guys. But I think with the coach that you mentioned right there, talked about, is again, maybe going back to what we said earlier with the actions on offense, you still got to teach some things, right? You can't just say, hey, we're working on defense right now, so go do your thing. All right, what's the ball screen cover? Okay, what do you mean by that? You still have to break those things down. There's still teaching time. Sometimes I do give into the whole, what we got to do this in practice, just because if I don't emphasize it, it's not going to be important to them. Truth be told, we can work on rebounding every single drill, every single practice. We can work on defense but if I'm not saying, yo, man, this is the rebounding drill, we got to get tougher, we got to buy. They don't see that maybe you emphasize it or see it as important as maybe you do with that.
Talk to me about footwork, the value of footwork within what you do.
You know what? I think maybe we almost did a better job of this years ago. Again, spark up internet outrage right now. Are you a permanent pivot foot? Are you a jump stop? Are you left, right, inside pivot? And all of a sudden, the more you got into this and you watch the elite shooters and they're doing all of those things, right? Different situations. My 13-year-old right now, yes, we taught the left, right. Yes, we taught the inside. But again, sometimes you're hopping into this thing and it's not wrong, right? Sometimes the defense doesn't allow your footwork to be what it was. So we've gotten away from maybe saying everybody has to do it this way. Different people have different comfort levels. That being said, there's nothing I hate more than footwork turnovers. And maybe I got to do a better job teaching it, but turnovers are never, turnovers usually are bad. There's some that we know we can live with. And I hate to say any turnovers okay, but man, those footwork turnovers drive me nuts. And so we do make sure that we do have a freshman. We got some transfers right now that, hey, like that gets called to travel at this level. But again, not to go on this, but sometimes you watch a lot at AAU and club and high school. Those things just aren't getting called by officials the same way. And so you do have to break habits. I think there is a teaching component to this. We do break it down, but I've probably gotten away from it's my way. This is no longer, your jump stop doesn't work for me. Your hop into it doesn't work. Hey, if you're hopping after your catch and we got some issues, we got some things we got to work on. But a little bit more individual right now of what works for you. Let's build that. There's enough other things that you have to learn. I can live with you doing it your way. I can live with that shot looking this. I can even live with your spin doing this. But if it starts becoming issues and there start becoming turnovers, then I think we got to really cut back. So we do a lot of stuff on footwork, especially early in the season, but it's just not as uniformed across player to player that maybe I was so hard set on doing that back in the day.
Makes sense. And I think specifically like in point, if you give it to what would be the center. And there's another question, is it like you're not necessarily positional in what you do, right? You're putting players in the best position for them rather than a traditional, say, 1 to 5 type of positioning, right?
For sure. And I think that's something when I gave into the high post stuff, and now we love it. We do a lot of things with it. If you were to watch our film, you'd see that maybe our 4s and 5s are probably at that spot more often. If you were to watch our men, Jacob Gilliard is playing in the NBA as a point guard. They were really good at that point spot, that elbow spot. I think when you grow up as a post player and you're doing a lot of post work inside, it's just natural for that footwork to be a little bit different than what some of those point guards are. We'll teach, but again, even in the post, is it better off with your first step to be your inside foot to the basket, or are you better off pushing off? Again, man, different people, it works different ways. And we've probably gotten away from that uniformity with that. But we are making sure that your footwork is solid, that you're not creating terms, that you're putting yourself and giving yourself an advantage. It's just at this time, when you're 18 and 20, and again, sometimes we're getting kids for the first time when they're 20, even 23. That's just not something we're breaking down and changing for you over the next 7 months.
Love it. And I think one of the clips I posted online was where you blended in kind of a flex cut, a zoom, and all these different actions together. And I'm curious, like when you do get to that point, are you calling some set actions? to get specific players' advantages?
We do, and I think I know the one you referenced, and I think it was the first time that we ran it, and we were getting our tails kicked at Duquesne. So it was one of those, what the heck, as a coach, we had played around with this action, came out of a timeout, ATO, and ran it. That I think sometimes, and this almost happens more often, maybe halfway through the season or further, when you realize that you're just not generating the high quality of shots that you had before. And sometimes that's, oh my God, guys, just move. Hey, oh my God. But sometimes like we said earlier, paralyzed. Just tell me what to do, coach. I don't know, man. Just read and play. That's just stacking actions on top of it. And so sometimes we may call it a play, but it's still, and again, sometimes I'm even having my play call sheet. I feel like I'm a coordinator in football these days, the way that we call things differently. It's no longer Texas. It might be these three words, which means something to us, but it's just three different actions stacked on top of each other. Sometimes when we get to that point, it's all right, hey, we're in this split and you're going to go back door. And now this is going to turn into a back screen. And now we're going to dribble handoff for you after you come off the back screen. Those are the times, as much as I hate saying that we have play calls, those are sets that we will call and we will talk about, whether that's after an ATO or some of that was just honestly being run on the fly when we were rolling through that A10 tournament, rolling in the A10 tournament, because our kids, but again, it wasn't memorizing a play. I had an assistant coach many years ago that sometimes it's like you're the chef and your menu, you're an Italian chef. All right, these are your ingredients. You're a Mexican chef. These are your ingredients. You can make a bajillion different things, but really it comes down to these are your ingredients, right? And so we may have 8 actions, but we have hundreds and hundreds of possibilities and capabilities when you use those ingredients in different order at a different level, how you trigger these sort of things. And so we're not practicing a lot of different things. I think we're hopefully maximizing and mastering a small number of things. But I think because we do that, we can stack those things on top of each other.
You obviously love coaching. I can tell. So many amazing things you've shared with us. Do you watch other Princeton style coaches to get inspiration at this point, or is it better to go outside of that to get things that might be able to be adapted to it?
Yeah, I'll go back to my standard answer today. Yes and yes. I think obviously, and how we came about this offense really wasn't because of what the men were doing. So much of this was using the time over COVID just to study new things. That was maybe one positive in my life over COVID, was just deep diving into what this is. I was very fortunate to have two friends in the NBA that I just started picking their brains a little bit, and they were just did a very good job of sharing. And so I think you can be both, man. Sometimes you got to shut your door and just make things up on a board and see if it works. And then other days it's, ask some of the staff, hey, what'd you see last night? My assistant's great at finding things over in the FIBA world and Europe and stuff. But like I said, there's so many great people out there sharing it on Twitter. And so I'm bookmarking things on Twitter. I wish I could get off of there more often than I am, but bookmarking things, coming back to it. Sometimes I'm sharing that with staff. I'll be honest with you, Chris, a lot of times the first time maybe they're seeing it is when I'm just drawing it up and checking it out in practice. And whether it works or doesn't work. Hey, coach, when we did it, what was that called? Or, hey, what are we going to call this? I don't know, man. I just want to see if we like it first. Let's see if it works. Let's see if we like it. But it goes back to what we talked about first, man. There's just so many great people out there, and they can be high-level coaches. There's people that are doing this as a side hustle just to check out what's going on. There's just people that are passionate about basketball that are uber successful in other things in life, but they just love offensive basketball. And where our game is at, if you're a new coach, if you're an old coach, study, find new things. There are new things being invented in basketball, and maybe we all are stealing things, but there's just so much great material out there. You've got to be a constant learner. I don't care if you're just getting into the game, you've been around for 30 years. Sometimes whether it's high school coach and new coaches right now, they're doing just as good a job as we are. And sometimes, be honest with you, especially from the offensive end, they're doing better things. They're a better job at finding things than what I'm doing. And that's where I think we got to be careful and not getting set in old ways of what used to work. We won a championship this past year. I've said this to my staff. We were good. If we ran the same thing that we ran in 2019 with that championship, we wouldn't have won this year. It would not have worked. So I think you have to be adaptable as a coach, find new things, be willing to listen to staff members when they have differing ideas. You just can't do the same thing over and over. I do think those days are over.
I love that. What a great answer. And what a great coaching community we are all a part of. And I can tell you, after 330 plus episodes, I'm still in awe talking to people like yourself. It's just so humbling, and it's so beautiful to hear you and others talk about basketball and your passion for it. Man, I can't thank you enough. I told you it's long overdue. to have you on, and I'm so grateful for you to be able to share the game with us.
Right back at you, Chris. And I think what you've done, again, amazing. I'd like to think I listened to most, if not all, of those 300 plus episodes, but I just think that's a big part of this, right? There's a podcast world right now. There's a social media world. This is one of the huge positives that's stemming from both of those. And you've changed it, man. You really have changed the game and really made it a learning community out there and much easier to learn. So kudos to you, my man. Appreciate you.
Thank you.